Jantsch is a marketing consultant, speaker, and author of Duct Tape Marketing, The Referral Engine, The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, and his latest book, The Ultimate Marketing Engine. He is also the founder of Duct Tape Marketing Consultant Network, which trains and licenses independent consultants and agencies to use the duct tape methodology. So John, it is so great to see you again. You and I were talking before we started live here about how I first met you. It had to have been back in the late 90s, early 2000s. My business started in 1991. And at some point in that 10-year period, I decided, you know what, I need more help in how to operate a business. And I was going to every webinar, or not webinar, they didn't have webinars. And I was going to every seminar I could possibly attend. And I remember coming to see you speak at a library here locally in the Kansas City area. That was what, about the late 1990s?
Yeah, that's right. So I was basically participating in a practice that I still preach today that I call speaking for leads. I had started my own marketing consulting practice, and one of the best ways I've found to get in front of an audience in a very efficient way and have them first learn about me, and then hopefully at some point like what I'm saying and trust me enough to say, hey, could you maybe help us? And I still tell consultants, I have a network of marketing consultants that we work with, and I still tell them today, it's still one of the best ways to get in front of great audience and kind of move them along the customer journey. So I was doing that because I at that point in my career, I was a solopreneur starting a marketing consulting or growing a marketing consulting practice on my own.
And so it was shortly after that you released your very first book, the Duct Tape Marketing, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And it was really a distillation of what I had been doing. I mean, I know a lot of authors do great research and then come up with a theory and write a book. I mean, I basically just was trying stuff with my clients and documenting it. And I prior to writing the book, I was blogging and things and just writing about what I was doing. And that's ultimately what the book turned into, was really just a distillation of my practice at that time. But it was, we were early enough on that, as you mentioned, the whole digital thing was coming on, content was becoming a big deal. So a lot of the things I had been doing, maybe knowing, that was coming, was what I put in the book. And I think that's what's in a lot of ways, I think that's what's made it, we're recording this in the back end of 2021, and that book still sells, every single day. And I think that's, part of it is there really aren't enough people still, to small business anyway, preaching that marketing is a system that starts with strategy before tactics. And that's really the point of view that I've stuck with for, my 25, 30 years of doing this.
I just remember having it as part of my library, and it was such a good book. I loaned it to somebody and they never gave it back to me. So they must have found more value in it as well. So, but let's talk about your latest venture, which I'm so excited about. And you and I have had just kind of brief conversations about it. Your newest book, The Ultimate Marketing Engine. What brought this book on? Where did it begin?
Well, I think what probably brought it on more than anything else is I still practice marketing every day. I mean, we still have clients and I still do training. So, I mean, I'm very involved in the ways in which marketing has evolved, since I wrote Duct Tape Marketing, since I wrote, some other books on marketing. So I suppose in a lot of ways that was the genesis of why write another book. But in terms of this book, how it really was formed, I think I mentioned it. I signed the contract for this book on March 15th, 2020. And I always pause there when I say that, and people go, oh yeah, I remember what I was doing on March 15th, 2020. We all thought the world was going to end. So I found myself saying, what am I going to write about now? Nobody really wants to read, how to market in a time of a pandemic. But what really kind of launched, the real thread of this book, for me at least, was what I saw going on with many of my customers. Many of them, were obviously, everybody was scrambling to figure out what was next. I saw a lot of my customers not only survive, but ultimately thrive during this. And kind of the common thread was that their customers wanted them to be around. They were meaningful in the lives of their customers. They said, "Hey, we'll support you. What can we do for you? Can we buy gift certificates? Can we prepay? When the work gets going." I mean, and that to me, it has always been true. But I think somehow especially in the digital world, it feels like we've lost a little bit of that thread of being meaningful in the lives of your customers. On paragraph 2, I think it is, sentence 1, I write that the ultimate marketing engine is a successful customer. And I think that in some ways, could actually be a mission statement, for companies. And I think that it's probably, I think we all realized it's probably more important than ever to not just talk about being customer centric, but to really live it.
Well, that's where I think you and I are just, like I said, we're just so simpatico. I want to quote from your book. And normally I bought the Kindle version of your book. And normally I love just holding it up and showing you how many pages I bookmarked. I have highlighted hundreds of passages in your book. So I'm going to probably hit on a couple of them here as we go along. One of my favorite quotes from your book is the school of thought that says, "The purpose of a business is to profitably acquire and retain customers," is not entirely wrong. It's just limiting and hard to sustain. And then to go on from that, what if the purpose of a business was to discover what it takes to make your customers successful? And what if you concentrated all your efforts on that goal for an ever expanding roster of ideal customers? So one of the things that I find most businesses don't know how to do is to define their ideal customer. How would you define an ideal? How does a business go about defining an ideal customer?
Well, to me, it depends on where the business is. I mean, a lot of businesses are starting. I basically say it's a grand experiment. You're going to go out there and get some customers that you think are a good fit. You're going to work with them. You're going to learn some are, some aren't. And I think it's that point of view of constantly analyzing that. But when I work with clients that do have been in business for a while, they do have customers. Quite often I will get them to look at those customers and figure out a way to sort of rank them by profitability,
right?
Not necessarily by revenue. Sometimes, those big customers aren't always profitable, but really by profitability. And then add another dynamic. Do any of those customers refer business to you currently? When I get that group, and sometimes it's 10, 12, customers for a business, right, we really try to focus on, okay, what is it about them? What are the characteristics? What are the nice to haves, the ideal to have, behaviors that you've been able to recognize from those folks? And here's the question that I like to pose when somebody's kind of narrowing in on, okay, I think I think I know who our ideal customer is. Who can you provide the most value for the fastest? And you may not have an answer to that, but I know that in my world, that when I really start focusing on that, you automatically start saying, well, we can't really work with this. We'll take their money and we can do what they said, we want them to do. But if a company or a business, in our case, has specific characteristics and specific challenges, I know that I can go in there and make massive impact, very quickly. And I think that if we focus on that group, and that may be a very small part of who we serve today, we can then say, okay, what could we do even better for them? What could we do even more for them? What would incentivize them to give us 10 times what they're giving us today, or 100 times what they're giving us today? And I think that, the really hard part of building a business is that when somebody shows up and says, I have $5 for you today, it's very hard to say, no, that's not really a good fit. Right. But I think what we tend to do is we overvalue that $5 today, and we greatly undervalue the lost opportunity of not staying in our lane and focusing on that customer that we can just provide massive value for.
Right. And again, from your book, ironically, by focusing your attention on the growth of customer success rather than the growth of revenue, you'll ultimately come to experience revenue growth as never before. I come from the wedding industry, 30 years in the wedding industry, and I can tell you how that statement is more than true. By focusing solely on how you're going to help a customer, and wedding industry is just one example, but by focusing solely on how you're going to help a customer achieve their ultimate goal, how you're going to help them solve their ultimate problem, there's more revenue in that than there is in just about anything else that you can do. One of the things that you and I research items that both of us have spoken about in the past. I heard you talk about it one other time, and that's about how 86% of customers say that they will gladly pay more for a product or service from a business that provides a better experience. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's not about the stuff you sell, it's about the end result of what you deliver. And so that's the one thing that I try really hard to instill in the businesses that I consult with as well. So you say a customer journey passes through stages with names like awareness, interest, consideration, intent, purchase, and so on. And it leads to shapes and graphics that display the journey as a funnel that increasingly narrows towards a purchase. So let's talk about that funnel and the seven behaviors that lead to marketing hourglass.
Yeah, so most people are familiar with the marketing funnel, and I was, attempting to actually poke a little fun at, the terminology we use. It's all about getting the customer to do what we want them to do. Yeah. And for years, I've preached something I call the marketing hourglass, which, if you think about the shape, the top of an hourglass looks a lot like a funnel. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with realizing that we have to get some percentage of the market to know who we are, and then a smaller percentage to decide that they're an ideal fit for our business. But where I take issue is that so often that's where marketers think it ends. And I really think the great opportunity is to then flip that funnel over and say, no, let's look at expanding what we do when somebody buys, the experience they get when they buy, what would make them want to, return, what would make them want to do more with us, what would make them want to be an evangelist, and that the stages that I give names to are really more aligned with behaviors. So it's less about creating demand, like kind of old marketing preached, and a little more about organizing behavior. Because quite frankly, one of the things, with all the talk about how marketing has changed, over the years, I mean, you and I were doing this before we had the internet, Ron. Imagine that, right? And with all the talk about, how marketing's changed, the thing that's changed the most is how people choose who they're going to buy from, actually. And so that what we have to do is realize that in many cases, a decision to buy or not buy from us has happened before we ever even know somebody is a prospect. And so my 7 behaviors are know, like, trust, try, buy, repeat, and refer. And as I said, I think those are behaviors that we actually all kind of want to go through with the businesses that we do business with. I mean, if it's easy to test that in your own buying. I mean, if you have a problem you want solved, you've got to know who's out there that solve it. Well, then we quickly turn to the website and go, do I like what I see here? We may not say, do I like it, but we're certainly saying I don't like it if we're not seeing what we expect. And then, of course, before we're even going to pick up a phone or fill out a form today, we have to develop some level of trust. Does this company seem like they've helped people like me? Can they prove it? And then, of course, I don't know about you, Ron, but I love it when I can try what it might be like to work with somebody. I mean, that try might actually be going and watching somebody give a presentation or a webinar, or might be picking up a phone and calling. It's not always a 30-day free software trial, that we're going to, use to experience. And then I think we all like to buy. Ultimately, we've all been let down. Buyer's remorse is a real thing. And so I think that, as marketers, we certainly need to be intentionally realizing, what a client or a prospect is experiencing, at that stage, and intentionally making it a great experience. And then, of course, once we find somebody that does a good job for us, I mean, you don't go to the dentist, get your teeth cleaned, and think, well, next time I need to do that, I'll shop around and see if I can find a lower price. I mean, we like that convenience of check that box off, don't have to worry about that. Right. And then ultimately, I think we're wired as human beings to talk about companies that exceed our expectations, that surprise us, to give referrals. I mean, I can go overboard on this if you let me, but I think in the referral category, it's almost a form of survival in a way, because we know we're going to, need that referral. We know that we're going to, be able, have to go back or want to go back and find, who can solve, a problem for us. So I just think those are behaviors we want to go through. And so our job as marketers now is to figure out how we can guide people. We're not going to cram them through, guide guide them when they show up, and answer the objectives and the questions that they have at each of those stages.
Well, and I think a lot of what you talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, but first off, all of these elements have to work in concert with each other, in my opinion. They have to work together. And in the end, what it all boils down to is relationship building. Are you building a relationship with the customer to the point of not only do they like and trust you, but they've got to have you. You are the ultimate choice when it comes to who they're going to choose to help them with whatever that decision might be. So I personally am a huge believer in establishing that relationship, especially in service industry businesses, being able to, that trust factor falls at the top of the list there. Dude, are they going to trust you to do what you say you're going to do? And how are you going to go about managing expectations, which in a way, I dislike the terminology, but I understand the need for it. But how are you going to go about managing expectations so that they do understand that there is a process to what you do and they can trust you to follow along in that process?
Yeah, and that expectations thing is a big deal. I think a lot of people underestimate that. Sometimes it's just communicate. What can I expect?
Right.
And a lot of times, here's the sad thing about expectations is exceeding people's expectations. So if you tell them I'm going to have it on Thursday and you get it done on Wednesday, that's awesome.
Right.
And if they tell you, well, I don't really need it till next week, but you say, well, I can get it to you by Friday, and then you miss, even though they didn't need it till next week, you've blown the expectation. And so I often say when I'm starting some of my presentations is that a lot of our goal as marketers is to lower people's expectations. Now I'm being sort of facetious with that idea, but that idea of where it comes to play is to clearly communicate, have an onboarding process, have a communication process, and tell people what the communication process is going to be. I mean, it's just so powerful in terms of, kind of easing the buyer's remorse.
Well, it's laying out a roadmap of what's going to occur. As an example, if I'm doing business with an air conditioning repair service that's coming in to install all new equipment in my house, they're going to walk me through the process of what it's going to take to make that happen. There's probably a step by step, and then it ends with something like, and you won't even know we were here after we leave, that kind of thing. Yeah. And again, I think the same thing's true in any business that requires a process. That process needs to be passed on to the customer. Whether you think, some people may say, well, that's like telling them how sausage is made. Well, yes and no. I think that process is important for them to know, especially if they're involved in it. Though we had some, but I got to tell you a quick story. We had a remodeling company come in and redo our kitchen a couple of years ago, and we were having some real issues with our countertop, getting the right countertop. They replaced the countertop 3 times. And finally, one of the representatives of the remodeling company said to me, as we were talking about this, and I said, I'm really still not happy. And he goes, well, we can have them come back, but I'm just trying to manage your expectations, which were words I did not want to hear. I mean, granted, I understand you're wanting to manage my expectations, but please don't ever tell a customer I'm just
well, it's funny.
Cut them off.
I've got a similar story. But to bring home the point of how important this is, and it happens to be a remodeling contractor as well, is that if you have a process that allows you to be successful, that can also be a great marketing tool, to use, or a great sales tool. So this remodeling contractor, we created what we called the remodeling curve. And basically what it was this kind of bell-shaped, curve that basically talked about, here are all the steps, in the remodeling process. And by the way, here's how you're going to feel during each step. Right. And, so like plans approved way up here, drywall sanding, way down here. But I thought it was such a brilliant tool because it not only showed, look, there's a lot involved in this. There's a lot of steps, and we have a professional process to complete all those steps. But we do want you to know that again, it was managing the expectations by basically saying, you're not going to like this part, but hey, it's part of the deal. Right. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to talk about, their process.
Well, and I had a guy, one more quick story. We had flooding problems in our basement when we first moved into this house years ago. And we had all sorts of companies come out and give us bids about, they wanted to bring backhoes in and tear up the yard and do all and mud jacking and all sorts of crazy stuff. And it was just awful the way they were explaining all of it. Finally, we got a hold of a company that came out. The gentleman that we sat down with was a ex-military officer. And he said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to come into your home. We're going to put a trench inside your house. No need for backhoes and all that. We'll put a trench inside your house along the basement wall where the water is coming in. Then we'll put in a sump pump. It'll pump all the water out.
Yep.
And I said, so what happens if that doesn't fix the problem? And the guy said, you know, I wouldn't tell you that it would if it wasn't. And I went, you're the guy I want to hire. Because all of a sudden I had this huge trust factor in the fact that, yes, they're going to do this. Plus, when they got done, we had with jackhammers and everything else, I had no idea they were here. Okay, so moving along. So you have another quote from your book. I love quoting your book. Finally, as human beings, we are wired to talk about and refer companies that surprise us and exceed our expectations. I saw somebody post on Facebook this morning, you know, how do you go about getting your satisfied customers to refer you? By making them more than satisfied.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, that's part of the issue is satisfaction is a pretty low bar.
Right. Well, and I think you can get a 5-star review from a satisfied customer if you can find a customer that's going to settle for just being satisfied.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion anyway.
Well, I mean, and you know, speaking of reviews, look at the reviews, read your reviews. I mean, I talk about this all the time because if you read, I've read probably several thousand, you know, reviews because I think they're amazing, you know, clues to your core message to what you do different. And you'll always see that they rarely talk about the product, or they rarely, in some cases, talk about the result, you know, that happened. It was really all about how it happened.
Right.
It was all about the person that made it happen. And I think there's some real clues in there as far as, you know, how you get people more than satisfied as you exceed their expectations. And the good news, sad news is that their expectations are pretty low. I mean, when you talk about home services businesses, you know, that we were talking about, you know, a lot of times it's just like, well, you get what you get, you know, that's you know, that's the industry. And so somebody who actually gives you something more, we're going to talk about it because it's like, wow, they showed up when they said they would, and they cleaned up the job site. That's amazing.
Right. And you also say that, you know, it's about paying more attention to what the customer is trying to achieve and less to what about our business is trying to achieve, because it's really easy to get caught up in that.
Yeah.
Well, we think we know what our customers want rather than actually knowing what our customers want and creating the most positive customer experience has grown. And you're right, it has grown as an essential aspect of the customer journey, especially now during the pandemic, or as we're coming out of the pandemic, as this is being recorded. But because I think during this time, more and more customers are looking for ease, they're looking for safety, they're looking for empathy, they're looking for so many things that in the past were just taken for granted.
Yeah. Well, and I think they're also willing to change right now. I mean, I think there's a great opportunity because I think a lot of us had to change our habits, had to experience companies in new ways. And so all of a sudden, you know, sometimes the greatest friction, you know, to somebody bringing on a new company or bringing on a new process is that, change is hard, change is scary. But now we're all just like, hey, we had to change. It didn't kill us. Let's go for it.
Right.
So if you've got some innovation or some advancement to your customer experience, now is the time to bring it on.
Well, and I think that customers are more willing to accept, but for lack of better words, mistakes. If you're trying to do something that's going to better their experience with your business. In other words, you know, as long as it's not, as long as you're not doing something willy-nilly, if you're just trying really to make an impact on that journey, on the time that they spend with you. And if it fails, then be willing to say, hey, you know what, that didn't work. We're going to try something new. We're going to make an adjustment on what we're doing right now so that this doesn't happen again in the future.
Yeah. And just try to manage their expectations.
Well, I love, and tell them, I'm just trying to manage. I mean, because customers love it when you say that kind of stuff to their face. So one of the things that one of the areas of your book that I I did spend a lot of time with was when you talk about sitting down with your team and actually trying to come up with the brainstorming impact of what happens here. I want you to talk about that, and then I want to share a couple of experiences that I've had in that same area, because that I created what's called the Imaginativity Institute, which is what I say is where entrepreneurs come together to blend inspiration, imagination, and creativity to overcome the greatest challenges of everyday life and business. And I'm a huge believer in we is always more valuable than me. And so anytime we can get input from around the table, it's to our advantage to help our business grow. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, you've given me the opportunity to quote one of my favorite philosophers, Ted Lasso, who says, "You don't bring an umbrella to a brainstorming event." And I think that the idea behind that is that just what you said. I mean, think about all the companies that the only people that actually talk to the customers are the salespeople, are the customer service people, are the customer success people, and yet, marketing sitting in some other part of the building saying, what should we say today to our customers? How do we trick them today? And so, just that idea of bringing, sales and marketing and service together to talk about what are you hearing, because it's so funny when content became a big deal, and all of a sudden people just went out and hired content people inside their companies. And then they would be some highly technical, engineering firm, and they'd hire a content person and say, write stuff. And that content person was like, well, I don't know what you guys are even talking about. How am I going to write stuff? And I would always tell them, go to your engineers or to your sales engineers or whoever they are and ask if you can see their sent emails. And just, you're going to see the questions that they're getting asked, and you're going to see, the answers that they're giving for those. In some cases, 3,000 word, answers. And that's going to be the source of all of your content. And I think that, there are many, many people that have kind of tapped into that idea that all we have to do is answer what people are asking us, answer the challenges that people are telling us they have, but do it in their words and in their language. And I think that that's, what brainstorming, can do is you really give people permission to say, well, you know what, the last 5 people I've talked to have said, this is their problem. Maybe we ought to write an article about that. But it can, it can be beyond that. I think that one of the mistakes I see a lot of companies make is that, again, marketing makes all these decisions about what's going to happen and what the message is and who their ideal customer persona is. And they're not teaching that throughout the organization. And my belief is that, any way, shape, and form in which your business comes into contact with a prospect or a customer, that interaction is a marketing function. And so, why not have everybody, being able to say, here's the best way to talk about our company. Here's who we provide the most value for. Here's our next 3 quarters worth of, marketing initiatives. Here's what we're thinking about writing about content. And just, it doesn't mean that you're going to sit around and go, okay, Bob over there in sales says we should do this and let's pivot, but just taking in that information will just make you so much smarter. And I tell you, the other thing too is, marketing today, based on what you and I are talking about, Ron, is as much about culture inside of organizations as it is about tactics. And one of the greatest ways to have a very positive sort of customer-centric culture is to make sure that everybody's involved in marketing, and everybody, has not necessarily a say, but certainly has an understanding about, what the brand promise is and who, you're trying to be for that customer.
And I think when you talk about brainstorming requires a couple of things of stepping. Again, another one of those terms that gets overused, but stepping outside of your comfort zone, because in my opinion, if you're going to have a brainstorming session, first off, it needs to be a safe space where every idea, regardless of how crazy any one individual may think it to be, is allowed to be iterated, be spoken. I mean, and that needs a time span of where you can sit down take as much time as you need just to throw out as many possible ideas as you can to help whatever it may be, whatever part of your business may be in need of assistance. and be able to just let the ideas flow. And I did a presentation for a government agency not long ago, where they do internal customer service. All of their
Right.
clients are internal, so they don't have really a budget to spend on marketing, nor is it really of any value to them. But they also get graded. Whether their department is allowed to exist depends on their grade. 5 stars, they're going to be around for another year. If they get anything below like a 3-star, they're not going to be around for very long. So when we sat down to talk about brainstorming, it was a matter of, okay, so what are some of the ideas you can do to elevate the customer service experience that you have that's not going to cost you any money? And in an afternoon, they came up with dozens of ideas that were no money involved. It's just a matter of, are you going to actually sit down and implement those ideas to the benefit of your business? And again, it comes down to a manager or a supervisor that's willing to say, let's try that.
Yeah. And the only point I would add to that is I think it's important in brainstorming to kind of separate it from, don't throw that into the 30-minute staff all hands meeting,
No.
and then it's like, at the end, we're going to have brainstorming. I mean, it's almost a different skill, and you want people in a different mindset. Like, you want party hats and you want donuts and,
right.
And just like you said, and really give people permission to say stuff that, maybe people are going to shout down, or, maybe people are going to think they're silly. But it's kind of how you take that silly idea and find a seed in it that's going to then, turn into something real.
Absolutely. And just one last thing on, I mean, so often when we think of brainstorming, it turns out, it's a group of people that usually sit around a table. They throw out a bunch of ideas and finally goes, you know what, I got another meeting, we'll just go with that one because it's the easiest.
Yeah.
And then they're back 30 days later going, why didn't that idea work? So I want to talk a little bit about, because I think this also kind of falls into the brainstorming session, and it's the idea of YOLO.
Yeah.
Talk about you only live once. YOLO meaning, for those of you over 40 watching, YOLO is you only live once.
Well, so, I personally think that's, I do have 4 millennial children, so I guess I can claim to maybe get some of that from them. But it's also sort of, for me, it's also sort of an entrepreneurial mantra. I mean, a lot of folks are jumping out there. They're taking the big leap. They're doing stuff that people tell them is crazy. I mean, so frankly, I think it's applicable. But I talk about in the book, in the context of, the successful customer. And I borrowed this 100% from listening to a podcast, one of my favorite podcasts. It's Seth Godin's Akimbo podcast. And he has a bit at the end where people come on and talk about, or ask questions or make comments, and they're recorded, and he plays them and then riffs on a little bit. And this particular episode, a school teacher in New York, high school school teacher in New York named Howard, called in and said, I want to talk about this idea of YOLO. He said, a lot of my students say it, usually about when they're getting ready to do something stupid. And so I asked them to think about reframing it. And I challenged them by asking them to think about this. I want you to imagine you're going to visit a friend. And unfortunately, that friend is going to die soon. And you know it, but you can't tell them. And I want you to think a new phrase that I call TOLO. They only live once. And I know I put this in the book, and I actually acknowledge this might be kind of dramatic and deep sounding for, a book about marketing strategy. But I just remember hearing that and feeling the immediate shift in thinking about, imagine if we went and the next prospect or customer or teammate, that we had a meeting with, we went in there with that point of view. They only live once. Would that change the interaction? Would it change how we think about, how present we are? And so I threw that in there because a great deal of what I'm asking people to do in this book is think in terms of the transformation that they would like to create for customers over the transaction. And I think that requires kind of a new way to look at our customers, a new way to look at our business as a whole.
Yeah, and another way that I look at it is, what if tomorrow they elevated the 5-star review to a 10-star review? What would you do? What would you do to elevate? How
Yeah.
would you fill this space? Because that's a massive space. What else are you going to do for your customers that's going to help them feel good enough about you to give you that 10-star review? Or what if we were all of a sudden your particular industry was Academy Award winning eligible?
Yeah.
If somebody could nominate you, what would you do differently in order to make that experience far better for the customer? Um, before I want to go back for just a moment to talk about. We were talking about referrals a few moments ago, and an important element that I think got overlooked. We were talking about how to get referrals. One of the things you talk about, and again, another one of those things where you and I are just like so on the same plane, is talking about best way to get referrals is to do it through strategic partners.
Mm.
Um, I met you through not only through a network of people when I first came to see you, but I've also seen you through other networks that I belong to. Michael Port, I went to one of his workshops in Florida. You were there. I've seen you on a number of podcasts and such of groups that I belong to. So let's address this whole thing about strategic partnerships a little bit.
Well, yeah, when a lot of people think about referrals, they naturally kind of gravitate towards their customers referral. And
Right.
and that makes total sense. I mean, they've experienced your brilliance. I mean, who better to talk about you? But the challenge sometimes is, in certain cases, a great, happy, enthusiastic customer might have 3 or 4 people they could refer to you. But the right strategic partner, another business who is, I guess, not competitive, that also serves your ideal target market. I mean, they might be able to introduce you to thousands of people. You mentioned some of the places you saw me when I first started my marketing business and wanted to get out there in a bigger, broader expanse. I had something that companies wanted. They wanted marketing content. And so I was able to go to companies that had, large small business customer bases and propose doing a joint partnership, letting them co-brand my content, me doing free workshops and that kind of thing. And what the ultimate effect was that it was in many cases an implied referral. I mean, this company says this is a marketing expert. Never heard of him. Doesn't matter because, this company that I trust says he's going to deliver the goods. Now you got to show up, deliver the goods. But to me, it's an implied referral. It's certainly at least an introduction that can really go a long way towards you then, continuing to stay in front of that, in some cases, very large group. So it's when people come to me and they're just starting their business and they're like, I got no business. I got to get going fast. What can I do? The first thing I tell them to do is find somebody who has your customer already and figure out a way to provide value to them, and you will be well on your way.
So, John, before we wrap this up, let me ask you if people want to get a hold of you. First off, if they want to get a hold of the book, because I think the book is an excellent resource and it belongs in every business owner's library. What's the best way for them to get a hold of the book and get a hold of you?
Sure, you bet. So there is a companion site for the book, theultimatemarketingengine.com. Same thing as the title of the book. And you can grab a few chapters, free chapters there. All the booksellers are, represented there wherever you want to buy the book. There's the audio version as well as Kindle and paperback. But if you want to check out what I've been doing for the last couple of decades, as a whole, it's just ducttapemarketing.com. So that's DUCTTAPE marketing.com.
Yeah, and the beauty of your book is, and I haven't had a opportunity yet to do a whole lot of it, but you offer a lot of free stuff through your book. There's links to all sorts. You have a link to worksheets and workbooks, and I love how more and more authors are doing that, because it just gives you more of an incentive to not only purchase the book, but to actually elevate your business as well. So
yeah, I end every chapter, most chapters, with some action steps, and I this is stuff we do. Again, that's one of the advantages is that we use these tools with our clients, and that's how we develop them. And so I really want people to take action, and so there is a companion. When you get the book, you'll see there's a link to a companion site that has all these resources that you can grab and hopefully accomplish some of the steps. I always love it when people tell me they loved my book and I did X, as opposed to I just love your book.
So let's just wrap this up by a quick review of those marketing steps. The first one is to know your business.
You talking about the steps in the book, the
Yes,
5
yes.
steps? Yeah. So, because the subtitle is 5 Steps to Ridiculously Consistent Growth. So the first one is map where your customers are today and where they want to go.
Okay.
The second step is uncover the real problem you solve for your ideal customers. The transformation.
Right.
Third step is narrow the focus to the top 20% of your ideal customers. Step 4, attract more ideal customers with the narrative they are already telling themselves. And step 5, scale with your customers by serving their entire ecosystem.
Well, John, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I love, by the way, I love that background you have there. That's so woodsy. I mean, it's like you're in a cabin. I know you're in Colorado. It's almost like you're in a cabin in Colorado somewhere. I love that background. Thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it. And I think my audience is going to find great value in some of the things that we talked about today. And do go out and buy John's book, The Ultimate Marketing Engine, because I know that you'll find it of value, especially if you're an entrepreneur. And in particular, if you're just getting started, this is a great resource that you're absolutely going to love. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you some other time. Bye-bye, y'all.